friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Emma. If you don't know me already, I make houseplanty content all over the internet, so if you want to follow along with my houseplant journey and learn something along the way, subscribe to my channel and stick around and watch some more of my videos. Today we are going to be talking about this absolute beauty of a plant. This, if you couldn't tell, is the Alocasia black velvet. And oh my goodness, can I say, I love her so much. Like, I love a good black plant, and I love a good velvet plant, and I do like myself an Alocasia. So like, is it not freaking perfect? Oh my goodness, I'm obsessed with this plant, and I'm actually really proud of it too because I've grown it from the tiniest little thing. It was like a tiny 3-leaf literal baby plant when I got it. I think it was late 2020, and so it's taken a minute, but oh my goodness, look at the difference in size between these two. I'm just so proud of it. The Latin name for this one is Alocasia reginula, but I've never actually heard anybody call it that. They just call it a black velvet. It's much easier. Obviously they're known for their striking foliage with these insane contrasty veins. Like, oh, they're gorgeous. They can be a little picky. They are Alocasias after all, and if you don't give them their ideal conditions, they can be part of the one leaf club. They can have the one in, one out policy. Like, that is fairly common, but stick around because I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how I keep this one as happy as it possibly can be. Also, it's very shaky. But yeah, tips and tricks to make sure it is as happy as it can be and help you grow a big, beautiful plant. A bit of a fun fact about this one before we get into its care is that it grew dark leaves and evolved to have really dark leaves because in its natural habitat, they live on like the floor of the jungle, basically fully covered by the shade of the canopy of the forest. And so they evolved these really dark black leaves to collect as much light as they possibly could in order to give themselves energy to grow. So it's actually an evolutionary thing that they've developed, which is like, that kind of stuff blows my mind. Evolution and how things develop to work what they need, it just mind-boggling. Like, head explosion emoji, absolutely great. Like, I love it. So cool. Like most houseplants, the black velvet is going to ideally prefer bright indirect light, but they can tolerate a little bit lower into medium as well because of these amazing dark black leaves. But if you're not giving them enough light, they can grow quite leggy or even go dormant, which means they're not going to produce any new growth and they might actually lose some of their older leaves as well. On the opposite side of that, direct sun can also scorch their leaves. They're not like the thinnest of leaves, but they are still susceptible to sunburn, so avoid really bright, direct, warm, hot sun for long periods of time. Their ideal position will be in a bright room, just a little bit pulled back from a window, so they're not getting any direct sun on them. Dappled sun is okay, but as long as it's not too long or too hot, because that could cause burn. They're also really happy under grow lights. This one in particular lives in my IKEA cabinet, so it is getting grow light a decent amount during the day. A lot less in the spring and summer, which it is now. I think it's probably getting maybe 3 hours at most a day of grow light, and the rest of its light is just ambient, like a bright indirect light from outside. But in the autumn and winter, I was having the grow lights on for maybe 7 hours a day because it's just so dark here in the UK that they really need that extra boost. And I think it has definitely thanked me for it by producing some amazing, gorgeous, beautiful leaves. Watering can be one of the most difficult things when it comes to black velvets and Alocasias in general. That is where they tend to be their pickiest, but once you've figured it out, they'll thrive. They do like to stay quite moist, but they have very fragile, fine roots, and those need room to breathe between waterings. Otherwise, your plant will probably get root rot. So if you got your plant in soil, I would suggest watering when the soil is dry, about halfway down, maybe 3/4 of the way. That would be ideal for it because you're letting the roots breathe between waterings. In the spring and summer, that'll look like probably once a week watering, and then a lot less in autumn and winter because they're not needing as much because they might even go into dormancy. And overwatering is much more about frequency of watering than it is the amount you water, so you don't want to be watering too often, and that's why waiting until the soil is dry is super important. So use your finger or a water meter or something like that to really make sure that the top of the soil is dry before you give it anything else. But when you do water, you want to make sure that you are thoroughly saturating the soil, making sure it's getting nice and wet, and after you finish watering, letting it sit for like half an hour and then dumping out any excess water that is collected at like the bottom of a cache pot like this. You really want to make sure that you're not letting it just sit in water. That is not ideal for it. I personally like to keep my black velvet in pond, so my watering schedule does look a little bit different because it is in like a somewhat self-watering system. I have it in pond, and then there's just a reservoir of water in the cache pot at the bottom. So about the bottom third of the pot is sitting in water, and the roots don't really go down that far until they're ready. So I don't really need to worry as much about overwatering because in pond you can kind of let the plant take up what it wants rather than you forcing it upon it. And because it's a water reservoir, I don't need to water nearly as much because there's like a good amount in there at all times, which is awesome. Also, some say that you should use distilled or purified water because they can be sensitive to the minerals in tap water. I've personally not experienced that, and I pretty much only water with tap water, so it really depends on your area, but I personally haven't had any issues with mine. Black velvets like to stay quite warm. Their ideal temperatures are between 15 and 27 degrees Celsius or 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Any cooler than like 15 Celsius or 60 Fahrenheit and you could risk your plant going into dormancy and even dropping leaves, which is not ideal. So if we can avoid lower temperatures, that would be better. They also really don't like hot and cold drafts and big fluctuations in temperature. So if you can, keep them away from drafty windows, air vents, heaters, stuff like that, because they're just not gonna like that situation and not grow as well as you want them to. So avoid it if you can. They love humidity, like love humidity so freaking much. Like they're just here for the humidity. Ideally, if you can give them at least 60%, that would be good, but they'll prefer somewhere in the 70% range, a bit better. It'll help them grow better. So if you can provide that for them, why not? If your humidity is too low, it can cause your leaves to crisp up and go brown along the edges. There's a pretty common problem with these ones, so keep an eye out for that. If that's happening, you might want to put it in a more humid place. You can do so by putting that in a kitchen or a bathroom if they've got enough light in there, or grouping it with other plants, which naturally boosts humidity, or putting it on something like a pebble tray. If none of that helps, you can get a humidifier to help boost the humidity. That's probably the easiest, most surefire way to get the humidity higher. I'm not surprised it's a humidifier for that reason. This one personally gets loads of humidity because it's living in my IKEA cabinet, and literally right now the humidity is 92%. The humidity in there ranges from like 99 at its highest. I don't know how it gets so freaking high. It's probably because I just watered. And then lows of like low 70s, maybe 60s. So it is in a very humid spot. I think mine also really loves being in pond because it creates extra humidity. The water reservoir at the bottom of the pot allows water to just slowly evaporate as well, giving kind of a bubble of humidity around the plant, which it adores. So it's just another benefit of why Alocasia should go in pond. If you want to know more about pond, I have a whole pros and cons list of pond that I will link up in the clickable eye. So head over to that if you're curious about pond or you're thinking about trying it for yourself, because it is honestly, for this plant, I'm pretty sure it's like the miracle medium for it. You want to fertilize them probably about once a month in the spring and summer, not at all in autumn and winter. If you do have your plant in pond like me, if it's in lechuza, that will have slow release fertilizer in it, which will last it probably about 6 months. And then after that, you need to supplement fertilizer somehow. I personally use liquid gold leaf at the right ratio for hydroponics or semi-hydro. That seems to be working really well. You can also use liquid gold leaf for your plant if it's in soil or any all-purpose fertilizer, but if you are using all-purpose instead of just a houseplant fertilizer, it might be worth trying half strength before going all in with it, because some of those all-purpose fertilizers can really burn the roots of the plant, which is not ideal. If you're going to put your plant in soil, a coarse, well-draining mix is super duper important. Ideally, something peat-free is good as well, because you don't want it to hold on to too much water, because that can suffocate the really fine roots that are like yearning for some air as well. Also, you want to make sure that you're putting it in a pot with drainage holes. Drainage is super important because you don't want just water sitting at the roots. Like I said, I personally really like pond for these because it allows that perfect balance of moisture and air, especially in a self-watering system. It just works for me in my collection, and it makes things a lot easier. They don't need to be repot all that often. It's worth giving the roots a checkup maybe like once a year to make sure that they're okay and they're not growing out of their pot. If you notice that the roots are coming out of the bottom of their pot, it is time to go up a pot size. I actually recently brought this one up a pot size in one of my recent videos. Maybe it was like a month ago. Either way, I recently brought this up a pot size because it was definitely outgrowing its old pot, and now I think it is very happy in this new one. It has just popped out this brand new leaf, which is gorgeous. It did lose one because that's sometimes what happens with Alocasia. It's the one in, one out sort of thing, but absolutely loving this. The easiest and most common way to propagate Alocasia Black Velvet and all Alocasias is through these tiny little things here called corms or bulbs, and you will find these usually underneath the substrate of your Alocasia plant, growing by the roots. And basically these are how the plant grows new plants. The first thing you want to do is make sure that your corm is firm. You do not want it to be squishy, because then when you try and like moisten it to help it grow, it will rot and won't grow anything except for mold, which we don't want. So you want to make sure that it's nice and firm to the touch. And then I like to use a method called the shallow puddle method, which I coined in my little Alocasia bulb growing video, which go watch that if you're curious about growing Alocasias from bulbs, because it was so much fun. It was a really good experiment for me, and I learned a lot through that process. I like to use the shallow puddle method, where I get a small little container and fill it just a tiny bit with water, just so it covers the bulb about halfway, and close the container, and I just let it sit. It doesn't necessarily need to be anywhere bright. I've got a couple just sitting underneath pots in my IKEA cabinet. They can be out on shelves. It doesn't really matter because it's a closed system. And I just wait. Once the bulb starts growing roots and what looks like a sprout, I will then pot it up, usually into pond, just because I've started keeping all of my Alocasias in pond because it's so much easier, and go from there. Watch it grow into its little baby plant self. Unfortunately, Alocasia Black Velvet are toxic to animals and humans, so keep out of reach of your pets and children. You do not want them munching on this one. Do not let your pets eat your plants. Don't let your kids eat your plants. Don't eat your own plants, unless they're edible plants, but don't eat this plant. It's not for them. Ingestion can cause stomach irritation and so much more, so just avoid it at all costs. I have also heard it is good to wear gloves while repotting and propagating this one, because the sap can be an irritant. I've personally not noticed that myself, and I never handle my plants with gloves, but if you have sensitive skin, it might be worth doing that just to be on the safe side. So that is it. That is all you need to know about the Alocasia Black Velvet and how to keep it happy and healthy. I hope you enjoyed this video. If there are any other plants you want me to talk about in the future, leave me a comment down below, and also leave me a thumbs up if you like this video, and subscribe for more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!